So one of the people who I've been studying, Malidoma Some, he writes that you cannot experience harmony in your current life if you have unhealed ancestors in your lineage. Because that energy of trauma is just going to keep radiating forward. Hey, beautiful. This is Aminata Soul Plant Walker Firewoman, and I am the host of the Mother Tree Network, where spirituality and earth wisdom meet racial justice and women's leadership. Happy spring, gorgeous. It is Aminata, and I am so excited to be sharing with you today. I am introducing a solo episode. I want you to think of this as like a fun masterclass on how to connect with your ancestors and why you should. I shared this information as part of an intimate workshop with folks in the Mother Tree community and on my email list, and it was so juicy. I made sure to remove the sharing that people did, but I want you to know that when I offer these free sessions, they are super valuable. And I'm so glad that people open their hearts. And I'm so glad to be able to share with you an edited version of this masterclass so that you can get started or go deeper in connecting with your ancestors. Before I head you over to the workshop, I want to make sure that you know about my Apprenticing with Earth opportunity that's coming up. We are opening up again to accept new folks into this apprenticeship in mid-May, and it is a delightful container for you to connect with your ancestors, to connect with your plant ancestors, to feel the divine in your life, to connect with your heart, and to get all of that wisdom and guidance and support so that you can slow down, so that you can actually go forward if that's what you need to do, so that you can enjoy this opportunity on earth right now. Apprenticing with Earth has changed my life. Apprenticing with Earth has really changed my life. I am so grateful that I get to appreciate and feel so much caring radiating toward me and through me because of this apprenticeship with Earth. And when you join our container, I share all of those practices with you. I listen to you. We have something called intergalactic apprenticeship calls, and that's like a one-on-one. You might call it zany or woo-woo listening session with me where we go deep into guidance from your non-linear, non-rational mind. And it is a beautiful, beautiful thing. So I hope that you'll check that out. You can just go to my website and sign up for a sacred listening session, and we'll listen for if that's the next right thing for you, or if there's something else that you need to be doing or being for your personal evolution at this time. All right, without further ado, let's get on in there and find out how to connect with our ancestors and why you should. See you on the other side. So let's talk about first, what do I mean by ancestors and why I think they're important. So by ancestors, I'm sure you have probably, if you look it up in a dictionary, it's someone in your biological lineage. Typically, that's what we think, a biological person who has died. My definition of ancestors has expanded. We share DNA with a lot of beings who evolved on Earth prior to human beings' evolution or presence here. We share DNA with beings who are far older as a species than human beings are. And so when I think of ancestors, I am thinking of a lineage beyond the human lineage. And I think this is important because one of the challenges with us having been colonized by what is now this dominant so-called Western overculture, which has globalized itself, is that it has created this idea of us as individuals, separate, distinct, and honestly small, you know, like these tiny specks in this world where there's a lot of alienation from self, from family, from the natural world, from our divinity, and from our ancestors. So why is it important to reclaim this? Well, if you think about why was it important for colonizers to break it, that'll give you a little indication of why it would be important to reclaim it. So, you know, in this call, many of us are based in North America, but even if we're based in other parts of the planet, we have been affected by European colonization. We've been affected by, you know, some of us maybe have been affected by colonization from the Arab world. Okay. So how do you colonize people? How do you get them to give up their land and their bodies and their children in the service of your project? Partly you do it through violence. It takes a gun. It takes force. But as you know, that is a very expensive way to maintain control. So other forms of colonization to get people to get into their heads and into their hearts, to have them shift to your view of the world, makes it more efficient. So if you remove people from their sense of connection to all that is, to ancestors, to interconnectedness, it is easier to dominate them. It is easier to break them apart and to manipulate them. I think it was Marx who said that the first instance of European colonization was England over Ireland. So colonization isn't just what we think about most recently since, let's say, the 15th century. I would look at colonization as having happened also within the European continent of peoples against each other. So when we're stripped of our connectedness, we are left with a sense of ourselves as small, as individuals who are in competition, right? And if you look at, you know, Westerners talking about themselves, there's a lot of discontent, unrest amongst Europeans themselves at the modern condition. And of course, there's discontent and unrest and pain and trauma of people who were suffering, who were dominated by colonization efforts. So what I'm getting at is our sense of alienation and tendency to numb out, tendency toward addiction and distraction is part of our having lost power, agency, ashe, the ability to make things happen. When you are numb, distracted, cut off, you are less able to manage your power, intervene in ways that are going to promote health and harmony. This is also important because there's generational trauma that then we're carrying unconsciously or somewhat consciously, but without an access point to heal. And the thing about generational trauma, of course, is it doesn't just affect you, it affects your grandchildren, your children, your grandchildren's children. So when we do the work of ancestral healing, we are healing forward, and we're healing backwards, and we're healing in the present moment. We are remembering. It is fundamentally remembering what has been dismembered psychologically, psychically, and in some case physically. So one of the people who I've been studying, Malidoma Some, he writes that you cannot experience harmony in your current life if you have unhealed ancestors in your lineage. Because that energy of trauma is just going to keep radiating forward. And this is on an individual level, my individual family, but it's also on a collective level, my collective people and peoples whose DNA I carry. So we have a personal interest in our personal lives to heal this for ourselves and for our children or our sisters' children or our aunts' grandkids. And we have a collective benefit, a collective reason to do this, our relationships with our ancestors. How do we remember? Hey, beautiful. Would you benefit from a safe space where you can slow down and listen? Listen for what your ancestors have to say, what the earth has to say, what the divine has to say to you? If so, then head on over to my website, dramandakemp.com, and sign up for a complimentary sacred listening session. It's 30 minutes where you get to slow down and listen for the vibration of truth. I'll hold space for you. I'll light a candle for you. And together, you can answer your questions. Look forward to seeing you. And I say this because even if you don't know names or stories, because you didn't have direct contact with people past a certain generation, you can still remember. So how do we do that? So I'm going to tell you the physical thing first, and then we'll talk more the energetic thing. A very easy way to start to remember is to create an altar. So an altar, in my case, I first really started feeling more connected with trees. That was my access point. And so I know someone who's in our apprenticeship right now, and she feels a connection with a river. So the point is, where is the access point for you? Start there. Create an altar that includes that as your access point. Maybe you have a beloved teacher who has passed away, or you know your mother, or you have a sister. Start with where you have the access point of love. Physicalize it. If it's a human person, then you can make an altar to that person. If it's a tree or a river, then you have a place by the tree or the river where you put little, let's just call it offerings or reminders to yourself about what's so great about this river or why you love this. If we talk about an altar, one of my teachers is Jojo Ponsaroma, in her book, Wisdom Walks Self-Mastery, which I have had now for 5 years, and I'm really only now really appreciating it. So you can create an altar very simply. Put red cloth on an altar, have a red candle. Why? Because in Jojo Pa's worldview, which is based in the Dagara tradition in West Africa, red is a color of ancestors. So she recommends red. a candle, a cloth, and a picture, or something that represents that ancestor. Maybe there's a pipe that they had, or a favorite flower that you know they loved, or something from them or of them. On my altar, I have pictures of ancestors, biological ancestors, who I never met. I have pictures of non-biological ancestors who I never met. And for some ancestors who I've recently taken on healing, I actually just have their names. And in my case, with my biological father, I don't even know his whole name. I just have his last name. Physicalizing it is important. Having it be a physical location is important. Because as humans, this is my theory, as humans, we need some place specific to put our attention and our intention. If it's just in our head, it's very amorphous, and it comes in, it comes out, and it gets easily clouded. And, you know, if you spend like 5 minutes in my head, you'd be, maybe you wouldn't be, shocked at like the thousands of places I can go in 5 minutes. So I actually do need some place to focus, and an altar helps me to do that. If I keep it very simple, if I stay humble, if I, simple, humble. This space is a space where I am remembering my ancestors. So that's one thing. Create the physical space. Put some objects on it, using the color red if that works for you. How do I spend time? How do I remember beyond that? What do I do when I actually get to my altar? I am a doer. I'm not very good at just sitting still. You might be perfect at that. So you could just sit and breathe and experience your connection. If you need a little more action, you could sit and sing, ring a bell, light a candle before you breathe and sit. In my case, sometimes I journal, or I will pray out loud. And that little investing of my time and attention, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, I actually have water on my altar, change it every day, in part so that I can do something because I'm such a doer. It gives me a way to pay attention, and it's easy for me because I get to do something while I'm doing it. And I have a dream on here. Some people do a lot of profound healing through their dreams. My daughter is an incredible dreamer. She remembers her dreams, much less so for me. Although today, the morning of this sharing with you, I had a very powerful dream that I shared with Jojapa to help me kind of work with it. And I might share with you at the end, a little bit of what she said about this moment, what this moment is for us collectively in response to my dream. So that's how you can establish relationship. Be humble, be simple. Start with something small, physical. I didn't say gratitude. Do approach your altar with gratitude. I mean, some ways that's what humility is to me. It doesn't mean like hunching over, but it is like, thank you. I recognize that I'm not here by myself. Thank you. Thank you. I recognize that many have come before me. Thank you. Thank you. So let me pause there. What questions are arising? One thing I did not say earlier that I feel like needs to be said out loud here. We think about ancestors and we might be thinking, is this ancestor worship? Is this replacing God or divinity, with my ancestors? Am I putting my ancestors as God for me. And what I want you to know is that, no, unless of course you want to make it that way. If your worldview, if you don't have a divinity kind of situation going on in how you move through the world, and, you know, then you might use this practice as a replacement or as your, for that. But if you have a God or, religious tradition that that works for you, that you feel committed to and grateful for and all that, this is not to be in competition with that. And the way that Jodhapa, we were talking about ancestors. So for example, you could say Buddha is an ancestor because Buddha was a human being at one time on this planet. Jesus, the historical Jesus of Nazareth, was an ancestor because he was walking physically on this planet at one time. Mary Magdalene. I mean, there are human beings who you could claim as an ancestor who might not be in your biological heritage. And there's maybe God as as God as all that is, or God as, infinite, or however Allah. This practice is asking for those beings who experience materiality, who experience an incarnation into this 3-dimension reality, and who know how hard it is, how we deal with duality, how we deal with exploitation, extraction, sexism, white supremacy. What's so useful and powerful about ancestors is not that they know everything the way that God or divinity knows everything, but that they do know more than what you currently remember on this plane. And they remember when they were here. So their specific guidance, their accessibility, can be very useful to you, more easily accessible by you. But it is not to replace, if you have a world view that says that there is God or there are, many gods, etc. So you can, so you don't have to choose one or the other. Unfortunately, the way most of us got introduced to Christianity was through empire. We didn't get introduced to Christianity through a direct relationship or experience of historical Jesus. We got it through when it came in association with domination. And you might have a personal and very beautiful relationship with Jesus. But the institution of Christianity, when it came along with colonization, what it was intent on doing was removing us from our ancestral relationships and removing our, as you mentioned, Marian, our languages and our culture. So I want to say that out loud because that has come up in other conversations. Because now we got to get to the difficult ancestors. So like I said, trees were easy. I went there. More difficult was right inside of my biological lineage because I grew up in foster care. So there was a breakdown in my biological family. And it didn't start with me because breakdowns rarely start with you. We're talking historical repeated family trauma. So, when we're dealing with difficult ancestors, starting with the beloved and the easy on the altar is definitely my recommendation. Second, we go to forgiveness, honestly, because there has to be some kind of forgiveness process. It could be a ritual before we can accept those more difficult ancestors. There's a lot of ways to practice forgiveness. I'm not going to go into those here, unless at the end, if you want to have more of a discussion, we can. But I will tell you that in my forgiveness process, I was surprised to find out I had to forgive myself first before I could forgive these other difficult ancestors.
Yep.
Yeah. In my case with my mom, I had to forgive the fact that I was so angry and judgmental of her when she was still alive. And then when she died, I felt so guilty because she died unexpectedly. I felt so guilty. So then I had to forgive myself for all those feelings I had and how I expressed myself and didn't express myself with her. In the case of my stepfather and my biological father, let me deal with my stepfather, someone who I experienced as extremely abusive and who I was scared of for even as an adult. After having not seen him for, I hadn't seen him since I was 6. But when I would think about him, I would still feel scared in my 30s. And one of the things that has been fundamental to me with forgiveness is remembering that hurt people, and that generational trauma just expresses itself again and again if it is not healed. Jojo Pa talks about it as pain that you don't transform, you transfer. And so part of that working with difficult ancestors is a process of forgiveness, starting with yourself for whatever you did or you didn't do in relationship to those people. And then ritual. Again, I don't know. I was part of a faith community where we really looked down on ritual, a Christian faith community where we looked down on ritual, as if it was fake. If it was a ritual, that means it isn't real. But I've come to understand that ritual has a lot of power to detox emotions. And a ritual can be as simple as burning something. During this eclipse, I did a fire ritual where I wrote down the stories of resentment and judgment I had against myself and other people in my present tense life, and I burned it. And then I sprinkled the ashes in some water, moving water. And then I also put some ashes on my ancestor altar to ask them to help me transmute it. So if you notice a lot of things, what I'm noticing about ritual is that it gives me something to do. It gives me a place to focus my attention. It gives me something tangible to touch, as a way to symbolize or to help me shift from one state of being to another. Because my state of being, like I said, is so all over the place, a ritual helps to give it a little more oomph and to hold it. The final thing I'll say about working with difficult ancestors for me has been communication. So, and imagination. So I allow myself to imagine what my mother is saying to me. I was working with someone recently and she allowed herself to imagine what her grandfather, I think it was her great-great-grandfather would say to her. Imagination as a form of communication is really powerful. And in a lot of indigenous worldviews, the distinction between, what is real and what is imaginary, between what is real and thought, imagined, is not that, it's not a big distance. Because if you can imagine it, then there's a possibility for it to materialize. This is said in a lot of different ways. Consciousness gives rise to being, might be one way if you've heard that phrase before. So communicating with a difficult ancestor, how you feel, your side of the story, all of that is valid. And imagining their response to you, imagining their response. and considering it, not just disregarding it. It helps if you have a third party present. For me, okay. I'm just going to be honest. Different things work for different people. Like it has helped me. Journaling is a very powerful form of communication for me because I write very easily. So my husband is very auditory because he's a musician. And so for him to be journaling, it's just going to take him out of communication. It would be like a block. So he finds listening and playing what he hears or what he feels to his ancestors, and then playing what he feels they're saying to him. That works for him, but it's in the world of imagination. He's imagining it. I'm just making this point to you that imagination doesn't necessarily mean false. Doesn't mean it's a lie. Yeah. So I know that you have sprinkled seeds into this space, you know, and I've just given you some ideas for how you can add some soil to your seeds, you know, to feed them. And I want you to know that it is helpful to have someone, another human being who is like who you share about this with, whether that's, you know, someone in your biological family, or if it's someone who you're friends with, or if you have a teacher or a guide, a peer. I just encourage you to, part of what makes it real or more powerful is you doing a practice and sharing it with someone who's going to be supportive of you in the practice. I want to recommend a couple of resources to you as we complete this hour. So one is this book by Jojapa Saroma. It's called Wisdom Walk to Self-Mastery. And as I said, I also wanted to share with you about the apprenticeship. I'm not going to say a lot about it here. What I really want to do is invite you to join me on a sacred listening call so we can just listen if it's the right thing for you for right now. But what I will say here is that it's been such a blessing. If it's the right thing for you, it is soil for your seeds. It is a space where we are slowing down to regenerate with the earth. Where we're experiencing how good it is to remember our connection, you know, those behind and those forward, those this way and those this way, to come back into that interconnectedness with all that is. And we do it through practices like journaling or making music with our ancestors, by sitting under a tree and letting ourselves breathe and opening our hearts to feel the love from, you know, a part of creation like a tree or a plant. That is a wrap. It has been so good to be with you today, gorgeous. If you hear anything on this podcast that you think would help a friend or a family member, please pass it on and leave us a review. Leave us some stars. It helps us to know what is impacting people. I'm Aminata Desert Rose Plant Walker Firewoman, and you are gorgeous. See you next time.